I'm ready.
Okay. Um, I was the organization development person for the statewide union in Washington State, the Washington Education Association. In that role, I worked with local districts, the union, the UNISERV offices, and the UNISERV covered sometimes multiple um, um, educational uh, unions. I would say they represented multiple units, and some only represented one. So anyway, um, I had been in some talks with the president of the Meade Education Association just outside of Spokane, Washington. We have been talking about doing some strategy development, and that's what I mostly did. We call it strategic planning. I like to call it strategy development and implementation. So the notion is you end with a process, not a plan, not a document. That's my notion. Um,
Interesting.
so, but when people ask me what do I do around strategy, I say I don't do strategic planning. I do strategy development and implementation, because it's not about creating the plan. It's about what you do when you create that process for moving in either being more efficient and moving in the same direction or moving in a different direction, and sometimes doing both. So, um, and she and the superintendent of Meade, um, Bill Mester, um, they had been talking about how to do some joint planning so that it wasn't the adversarial administration versus the district, versus the union, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Mester had been to a conference and he heard Kathy Dannemiller speak. And Kathy Dannemiller and I joined her company, her consulting firm. There were 8 of us, and we became partners. And she and I did some things together. I had known Kathy for 20 years when we were both at Michigan together. And the 8 of us in the Dannemiller Tyson Associates wrote the first book on whole systems change, where you can get 1,000 people in the room. And we have been doing that with Ford, GM, U.S. Steel, Marriott International, etc. before I left and went to the WEA. We were located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I got recruited away from a mailing list that they had bought from the National Organization Development Network. And they found a bunch of names and mailed it to us. And I won't tell you that story, but went through a year long, and I moved from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Federal Way, Washington to be the WEA's and the NEA liaison. But anyway, so Bill Mester, the superintendent, and Bobby Blessant, and she was the Meade Education Association Teachers Union president. And he said to her, I was at a conference and I heard this woman speak who talks about getting everybody in the organization in the room, talks about getting 1,000 people in the room and doing strategic planning. I was thinking about talking with her. And Bobby Blessing said, well, that's who Kenneth used to work with. They used to be partners. Kenneth knows how to do that. And so Bill said, oh, he does, because I knew Bill. And he was an organization development, a student of OD. He loved to read, but he wasn't a consultant in terms of being able to implement all the time as a superintendent. And so Bill called me, and I went over to Spokane or Meade, and the 3 of us sat down and talked, and we started talking about what it would take to actually do this, something similar to this in Meade. And so I said, for what? I mean, what would you be doing? and why. And the presenting issue was the fact that they had done a, uh, a good job of bringing many stakeholders together, and this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, prior, and creating three guiding principles. And I can't find those, so I don't know where they are right now. But anyway, there were three guiding principles that they wanted the entire community to embrace as they were trying, as Bill was actually trying to lead a change in that educational system. And as time went on, he realized that the only people who even could tell you what those principles were, or were trying to actually live those principles, were the superintendent, the associate superintendents, and some of the school principals. So, and nobody else even knew what they were, or anything. And Bill's statement to me was, how do we make these principles live in the district and the community? I want these three principles to live in the district and in the community. He said, and that's what I want us to figure out how to do. And so for me, it was a dream come true. That's why I left Daniel L. Tyson Associates to come to Washington, or to go to Washington, to do this in education. And I had been trying to do something on that scale for 8 years, and no one would own the process. I didn't want anybody to buy in. I wanted them to own it. And I knew Bill would own it. So we set up a trip to Ann Arbor to meet with Kathy Dannemiller and to talk with her. And we spent time talking with her and looking over materials. And anyway, after those, and he took a couple of superintendents, associate superintendents with him, and Bobby Blessing, the teachers union president, went. And so after several days there and coming back and sitting down talking, they believed that we could do, that their community was ripe for doing this. So they thought that the time was right. And so that's when we decided to go ahead and begin to move forward with the planning of this process. Now, so I don't forget, from this time to the time that we actually held the 2.5-day session was 18 months. It took us that long to actually plan it. And I'll tell you, and I will get to why. So the request was, the presenting issue was, how do we make these three principles live? And this was actually it began in 1998. We actually did it in September or October of 1999. So this is 20 years ago, but the principles are basically universal. So the teachers union president, the superintendent, etc., and his cabinet, let's say, were all agreed that we should move forward. However, the first clue that told me this was going to be a difficult challenge was that within that district were 11 different bargaining units, not just the teachers union.
Wow.
And so, and Bill and I agreed was that if each of those bargaining, if all of them did not, each and every one of them did not own this process, we wouldn't do it, because it would not work. We'd have a major stakeholder that was outside of the process. So that's what took so long. One of the things took so long to plan it. So to think about how long did the intervention last itself, I would say the intervention actually lasted at least a year, because of the meetings that we had for 12 to 14 months, the stakeholder meetings that we held in the planning up until the day the actual event occurred. And so in that period of time, we held probably 2 events per month for a year, small ones. And what we tried to do was get at least one representative of each of the stakeholder groups that would be in the room at the end of when we held the planning event. So we would have a member of the teachers union, a parent, an administrator, a student. So and we couldn't have a member of each bargaining unit in each one of them, but we eventually got to all 11 of the bargaining units. We also created an event planning team. We had a steering committee that had all 11 bargaining unit presidents on it, parents. Someone reminded us we don't have the elderly community represented, and they have a large organization in this area. So we found someone who represented the elderly in that area and put her on. Wonderful, energetic, gosh, a great woman. We're so glad we had her on there. She contributed so much, and students, etc. So we had that steering committee, and then we had an event planning team that was actually planning the event. There was a subset of that steering committee plus some others. So there was overlap. Okay. In some of those planning sessions, we decided who would go and speak with what bargaining units to try to enlist their participation and ownership of the process. For instance, they wanted to know who would be a good person to go to the Bus Drivers Association. We decided that would be me, because as a graduate student in Ann Arbor, I drove a city bus in order to make money to pay for school. And when I went to talk with them, it was evident that they really liked the fact that I had been a bus driver, because we could talk about some things that no one else would really know. Like when a car fishtails, it goes shh, shh. When a bus fishtails on ice, it goes. So, so we were able to talk about some things like that just people wouldn't know. So anyway, we would hold one event, or 2 events per month. So we held probably 20 to 24 events, small ones, and we did a mini intervention. We would do certain things, like we'd have people introduce themselves in the way that we would have it done in the larger session. We had a process, an activity. I don't believe in well, I believe in them, but not in here. There are no exercises. They're all real-time activities called telling our stories. And that's how people got to know each other and how we introduced the room to each other. And then we do a couple of other things that will give them a taste of the process. So that's how many. The people in the room, as I said, were stakeholders from around the district and the community, etc. The steps taken in the process. Again, the event planning, the steering committee, the event planning team, the many sessions that we held. The client, there was 2 clients, the superintendent and the teachers union president, because the teachers union was by far the largest. It probably had more members than all the other 10 bargaining units combined. Okay. And the role of the client, the 2 clients and the sponsors, they're extremely effective, because when we said, you will be the ones who make the decisions about the process, about what the guiding principles are, how we implement them, all of that. You'll make those decisions. Nobody believed that. that they would really be in charge. So that was one of the reasons we gave them a taste of the intervention itself, the event itself. And throughout the conversations, once there's one particular gentleman who was very cynical, leaning back in his chair, and he said, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we decide. They'll change it." And I said, "Who'll change it?" He said, They'll change it." I said, "Well, tell me who is they?" He said, "The administration." I said, "You mean the superintendent?" He said, "Yeah, you know." I said, "Well, he's here. Let's ask him." So Dr. Mester got up and he said, "So what's your concern?" He said, "My concern is that if you don't like what we create, you're going to change it." And Bill said, "If we get 1,500 people," we didn't quite get that many. We got 1,350. But he said, "If we get 1,500 people from this district and the community in a room, and you all make a decision to do something, and you all agree on it, do you honestly believe I have the power to change that?" And the guy looked at him and said, "Well, maybe not." He said, "No, I don't. Not if that many people. This community is not that big. If all of you say we want to do this, I cannot change that, not by myself. And I won't. That's my promise to you." And so he and the teachers union president continuously made that vow to those people, those participants, before we got to the larger event, the culminating event. And so were they particularly effective? Oh, absolutely. It couldn't have been done without them, because they were the ones that were going to be held responsible at the end of this part of the intervention. Now, at this point, they didn't really see that the actual event itself is really the beginning. They're seeing it as a culminating event, but it's the beginning of implementation. And we worked with them to begin to see what that meant. So those promises, having them in the room for all the mini sessions, and the fact that the superintendent, they saw that he was taking the time to be there at every single one of them, which superintendents don't normally do. Okay, so that was extremely effective. Now, what kind of follow-up work did we do? Which to me is kind of related to the question that says, what kind of evaluation was done at the end of each event? At the end at the smaller events, you know, we had a paper and pencil evaluation, but also a pop-up evaluation saying, what did you learn? What may have changed for you? What do you think of the process? Will you commit to being a part of it? And we had similar questions, paper and pencil, at the end of each of the smaller events. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Oh, the follow-up and the evaluation. How do we measure success? The guiding principles were around student achievement, civility within the schools, so the culture that was created for students and how they behaved. So it was more than just grades, it was also civility. It was ownership of the district by community and parents. And what do we mean by parents? Mean having effective PTSA, Parent Teachers Student Association. The industries there in the community, having mentors and internships for the students. You know, those types of things. Those were what we were going to measure success around of these guiding principles.
Sorry, the power goes off all the time here, but I still,
Okay.
It'll come back on in a minute.
All right. I understand. Okay. Um, and so, and within those guiding principles, and you probably saw on the video where the one young woman said, when her mother passed away, then bingo, let there be light. When her mother passed away, they had doctors, nurses, interns, they had resident, they had everybody there. There was an ICU, and she said, "Why don't we have an ICU for children? When we see that they're failing, have people come around and create an intensive care unit around that child, so that child can move to the next level. It's whatever success needs to look like." So they did that. They created that. So we measure success by whether they did what they said they would do during the larger event, whether the people who committed to being a part were a part of it, and did it have the positive impact on student achievement, student civility, the community, etc. So that's how we did these things come to life, and they did. For instance, one of the complaints was about the class size, and so all throughout the district, people were saying, we need to lower my class size. And so one of the things Dr. Mester said was, okay, if we got $1 million somehow infused into this district, if we eliminated class size throughout the district, it would impact every class by one student. Would that work? They said, no, that's ridiculous. And we said, well, how do we choose, if we get money, where that goes? And so throughout this process, we would create little research committees that would run off and do some research and then come back and report to the steering committee. And so this committee went out and came back, and they said, all the research says that, I think it was K2, that class size matters the absolute most in like the first 3 grades of a child's education. So that was something that was presented during the larger event, so that the agreement in the large session was, if we get an infusion of money, that's where it'll go. We're not going to try to reduce class size, and that's what they did. They created a computer lab because that was something that they wanted to create. They had some monies. And so one of the positive impacts of this, at least for the couple of years that I was still around before I left to go to the Gates Foundation, was that when monies would come into the district that were earmarked for certain things, they didn't have a big fight or struggle deciding where it would go. They had already decided that. So you weren't saying having teachers say, we're going to go on strike because we want that money to go to salaries. You weren't having parents saying that I want class size reduced my kid in middle school has too many students in his class. They had already made these decisions. And so it really reduced the friction throughout the entire community related to the ethical and effective use of funds as they came into the district. So that's how we actually evaluated what contributed to making the experience such a difficult challenge. Well, as I said, 11 different bargaining units. That was very difficult, working with each one of them to get them to say, okay, we're going to fully participate and own this, not just buy in, so that if something goes wrong, we can buy out. If something doesn't go the way we want, we're going to be engaged in helping move it forward. What did we do different as a result of what we did what you did for the client? We really did. Once you realized it was going to be a difficult challenge, differently, and was the result of what you did. The result. Well, that's what I was telling you. We got their ownership, and we were able to move forward. Where it says once you realize that this is going to be a difficult challenge, what did you do differently? We engaged each of the bargaining units individually, independently, to work with them to begin to understand the process and to fully own it with us. And what was the result of what you did for the client or sponsor? Um, they didn't have to try to convince these stakeholders to be a part of it. It was really not their job to convince them. It was our job to let them see a different reality than they had seen before. And that's what we were able to show them so that they would be enlisted in it. What was different for your client as a result, short and long term? Uh, um, well, I think I talked about most of that. He didn't have to fight about the money. Um, oh, and one of the issues, we also had school board members, as many as we could have in. But that was another challenge. Another challenge was we had so many people that wanted to be there that we had to find a venue for it. The convention center, there was something going on there, and then they didn't have because of something happening, they didn't have another room that large that would hold that many people. And you have to have registration so that you determine the mix at each and every table. Okay, so each table we want to be a microcosm of the district and the community. So you have to manage that. So we had to have a list of everybody who's going to be there, what their role was, so that we can have a student or two at every table, an administrator as much as possible at each table. We didn't have enough administrators, but a teacher at each table, somebody from a different bargaining unit at each table, a parent at each table, a business person at each table. Make sure nobody reported hierarchically, organizationally to anybody at the table. So managing that was a Herculean task, just managing the table assignments and how they shifted throughout the 2.5 days from being in a max mix group, a maximum mix, the one I just described, to being in a back home group. Given this information, here's what now we're grouped in school or bargaining units. Here's what we're going to start doing on Monday morning that's different from what we've ever been doing, because this process methodology culminates really in people going back to work whenever the next work day is, literally behaving differently. And so in their back home groups, that's what they decided they would be doing, something differently. This ended on a Saturday afternoon. We did Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Monday they were doing something different. It was the client, both clients, they actually, they were very happy, and they were able to work with their constituent groups differently, positively differently, in a way that they had wanted to for quite a while. The teachers union president, instead of talking about having an adversarial bargaining session, they started talking about how to do interest-based bargaining instead of position-based bargaining. And the openers for their bargaining session were things that were already basically agreed upon during that session between them and the administration. So some of those issues were actually they were in the process of taking care of themselves even before they had to bargain them. So, that was with the clients. How do we know that we were done with the total intervention? Well, as the consultants, we were done. We were literally done Saturday afternoon, because we try not to ever build dependency. Okay, so once we're done, people know their roles. Now we normally would do like a 6-month reunion, which we did. Bring most of those people back together to evaluate how are you doing, what's gone well, what's been a challenge, and then plan some more. That's generally a day and a half, and we did that. So we weren't completely done, but in terms of day to day, we try to build capacity So when people left that day, they knew what they were going to be doing on Monday. Um, they knew who was going to be in charge of this group or that group or this activity or convening this. They knew. And so they didn't need us. If they did, they could call us, but they didn't really need us. We finally found room in at the fairgrounds, and we had to have two separate rooms. Um, and so as we videoed, we had to have video equipment and a videographer in both rooms. I had to write not only a design for our consultants as a result of the event planning team. The design was probably 30 or 40 pages long, like a script of a play. I had to create a design for the videographers that would say room 1, room 2, both rooms off because they're processing, back on at this time, all of that. And one for the logistics team, because we always have, when you're managing a group that large, you need a team for logistics. You can't put everything on the table, all of the materials that you want them to go through, all the assignments and things, because they'll be thumbing through that and not listening to you. And so things have to be done in real time. And as a consultant on the stage, if I say, your next activity will be to, and as I'm reading, I'll say, logistics is handing that out now. Each table had an in basket. And so if each table had 8 people at it, and this logistics person is in charge of 10 tables, 5 on this side and 5 on that side. Well, they had this already collated stack, and all they had to do is walk down the middle of those tables and drop, 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 drop. And so in less than 15 seconds from the time I started introducing the activity, it was on their table, but it wasn't on there beforehand. So they had to understand a design also. So we had to work with them to do that. Those are all the challenges, some of the challenges, but what did I learn from the experience? What do I believe will be the most important competencies for OD consultants in the future? I guess the thing I would say, which may sound trivial, but it's not. We were so diligent, I think, about designing that technology, that methodology, that we trusted the process. And what I really learned in that large setting was to really trust the process. Mm. And I think and to use our own guiding principles, and to know that they work. I mean, I think every OD consultant has to have a set of principles that guides their behavior, such as we never do anything for the group, regardless of how large it is, that we believe might hurt any individual in the group. Yet we don't do anything for an individual that we believe is going to hurt the group. We believe in using good adult learning techniques. So there are not a lot of talking heads. That everything we did was backed up by sound behavioral science research. So if we did this, we could tell you why, where the research came from, who started the research that culminates in these types of activities. I wrote a couple of notes that our process and our plan, and this. Okay, so this is what I believe that how does it say that OD consultants should competencies or what they should know and do. I'll put it that way. That the process and the plan must always be first and foremost client focused and client driven. Okay, so our role is to raise options, not to stand in front and dictate. Okay, that there's an action research approach. The process, the technology, the methodology is pre-planned and somewhat packaged, but it's fluid. It can move, different parts can put in there. So from that standpoint, it's not a canned program. Because again, we ask questions and we give options and let the client decide which option they want. If none of those options work, then we say, how do we find an option that's going to work for you? And then we do the research. Okay, so it's not a packaged program. And so when you say you've had consultants that were good consultants and others were content experts, yeah, the content experts, many of them have a packaged program and they know that very well. But a true OD consultant, if that's what you need, instead of a training program, that person presents options and has a range of competencies, not just in a particular content area. We believe that when you're working with a large group, that they all need to be working from the same data set, same database. So the beginning of our process, the event itself, and the many events before that, they all are helping to build a common database, so that when it comes time to make decisions, everybody is dealing with the same information. And if there are any presenters, again, using good adult learning techniques, they're short in duration, no longer than 5 to 8 minutes max. They're very focused. And then we give people time to process that, and then afterwards ask questions, but not during. Okay. Oh yeah. All activities build the common database, and all of the activities are also designed to help build the team, whatever that team is, whether it's a large team of people or various teams of people. We're going to go out and do some things, or it's a management team that's an intact team that's going to begin to manage their organization in a different way, or work with their direct report, or whatever it is, implement a strategy for their organization. We also believe that all of our activities should culminate in a paradigm shift for the people in the room. That before they leave the room, they actually see the world differently than they saw it when they walked in. You know, that's a part of our focus. And as I said, that all of everything is grounded in behavioral and organizational sciences, as well as other disciplines and research. So those are some of the guiding principles that we use, and there's some subset of those, I believe, constitute some of the competencies that OD professionals must have. They got to learn how to be client focused and client centered, you know, and have a set of guiding principles so that they do no harm. and that they build capacity, not dependence. One of my